and welcome to another exciting episode of Disrupting Doctors' Careers. As you know, I'm Abena. It is August, and I am about to go to the Caribbean next week, which I'm totally excited about, and doing a little bit of working from there. I'm still trying to work out whether I'm going to do a podcast there. Let me know if you want me to do a podcast in the Caribbean. It's Nevis. I talk about Nevis a lot, as you know. But anyway, I'm still for now in the UK. And I'm really excited to bring consulting back. We're bringing consulting back today, right? And we know consulting is one of those really popular areas, sectors to go into for doctors, particularly as a first step from medicine. It seems to be a very organic first step. But despite that, still, there are a lot of misconceptions and myths about that journey into consulting. So I have brought to you today and invited Lisi Hu, who is an ex-surgeon and management and strategy consultant at CF, which is a boutique firm. So it's a boutique firm that focuses on healthcare, life sciences, and private healthcare investing, right? So she is going to open up her brain and experiences and really help us get to a better understanding as what it takes to transition into consulting, but more importantly, really tackling some of those misconceptions that doctors have about that journey and the opportunities within consulting as a sector, which is huge, by the way. It's huge. But without further ado, I'm going to welcome Lisi. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to sort of share some of my insights and experience. I'm about nearly 3 years since my transition out of clinical practice. So
Nice.
hopefully I've got some insights to share that will be helpful.
Of course you do, else you wouldn't be on this podcast. No, seriously, every doctor I speak to, I'm always like, hey, you look interesting. Let's talk, but on the podcast. Because everyone has their own journey and insights, which is hugely valuable. And you're definitely one of those people. I can tell. And this is actually the first time we've spoken. So this is super, super cool. So let's start from the beginning. I mean, you left clinical practice 3 years ago. So let's kind of go back just before you started that journey. Um, Thinking about alternative careers, I assume for a while, like a lot of doctors do. And so, what was the draw with consulting and why consulting for you in the first place?
Yeah, so I started to consider this, I think off the back of COVID, and I think a lot of colleagues probably felt the same way, that particularly burnt out, and work-life balance became a really big area that I think everyone was starting to think about. And that's when I started to think, is there life outside of medicine, outside of surgery, particularly as a woman in surgery? It was going to be a very demanding career for the rest of my life. So I started to speak to friends who worked in sort of healthcare adjacent type roles. And a friend who actually works at the same company that I do now, she went down the route of healthcare management as a master's, and then sort of fell into consulting. And really, it was from talking to her I understood what consulting meant, because I think it's such an all-encompassing word that sometimes people say, "Oh, what do you actually do in consulting?" So really getting the understanding of what does the day-to-day look like, what are the projects that you can work on. And I was really passionate about continuing to work in healthcare in some capacity. I really wanted to use my experience and to almost make bigger changes to the healthcare system, NHS, but a few steps removed rather than direct clinical care. So that was
Mm-hmm,
something that really drove me to look for something that could tick those boxes.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the variety that you get in consulting was something that really attracted me to it. I spoke to a lot of people and thought, I think this is something that interests me based on the skills that I have. I had some career coaching as well to really underpin what is it that I loved about my job in surgery, and what is it that I want to take on to a future career, and sort of went from there.
Brilliant, brilliant. So, I think what's great is that you like a lot of doctors, you wanted not to completely leave healthcare and just to have something where you can actually continue to provide um, value, um, but leveraging your existing expertise and knowledge of the healthcare system without having to then do another qualification, which again is like another thing that doctors think, right, I've just got to go and get a qualification and then I'll be enough. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts
Yeah.
actually on that point. At any point in that move, were you like, actually, I need to go and get another qualification to then get into consulting? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that definitely crossed my mind. And maybe it's something that as doctors we're used to, which is what's the next exam I need to do? What's the next thing I need to accomplish? So
Mm.
part of me in my head was, oh, to do consulting, I must have some experience. I must have an MBA. But actually, when
Mm.
I spoke to people and said, how did you get into it? It was recognizing that what we bring, as you say, leveraging our existing skills. So actually, as an experienced hire, having had sort of 6, 7 years of NHS experience under my belt working, plus 6 years of medical school, that's a huge amount of knowledge that someone else who's come from the graduate route into consulting wouldn't have. So it's recognizing that we have added value that is incredibly insightful, and it brings a lot of credibility to consultants for people who have actually worked on the shop floor. Um,
Mm.
and once I recognized that, that was the bit that I really emphasized on in my sort of career journey was, yes, I don't have consulting experience, but I can learn that. But what I can bring is something that other people don't have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's great that you also had someone before you, your friend, to follow in their footsteps, essentially doing what they did, right?
Yeah,
So I think that's also like another layer of like reassurance that you don't need to go and get X qualification to reasonably get a role. So I think that's really interesting. So I'd love to hear more about your experience, that transition from clinical to non-clinical, from public sector to private sector. What were the key mindset shifts that you had to make in order to thrive? A, get the job, and B, thrive in the actual
yeah,
job. I know it's a very
yeah.
big question, but what like intuitively stands out for you in that?
Yeah. So maybe if I start with getting the job,
Yeah.
um, I know that getting a job in consulting is incredibly competitive. So actually starting from a place of having a referral was key. I knew that where I work now was a company that I wanted to apply to. And in fact, that's the only company that I had applied to coming out of medicine and then got offered a role there. So it was being really focused in my approach, understanding a lot about the company, their hiring process, doing the preparation. And I think, this is something that medics are really good at. It's like understanding what's needed and doing the prep. And
Yeah. I'm gonna
I went,
circle back actually because you've
yeah,
already mentioned some really important points that we always emphasize in our Doctors in Industry Fellowship. So one, and also like a lot of the podcasts I've done. Number one, referral. Like, don't underestimate the value of being referred by someone that you know. So I talk about one of the earliest podcasts for those people who are listening, one of the earliest episodes. I talk about how to get into health tech, but it's relevant for pretty much any job or any opportunity. There's the front door, the side door, and the back door, right?
yeah,
So what Lisi has just described is what I call essentially the back door, like the VIP door where someone's already
yeah,
vouching for you and they're like, cool, we'll take a look at you because someone in our company. And you know that companies, they also reward and encourage others, like their own staff members to refer other people because good people bring in good people who bring in good people, right? So that is one way companies hire without ever advertising. And so I think that's a really great point that you've made. So don't underestimate the power of referral and the power of actually letting people know that you're interested in doing something and that's what opportunities come. Because I know a lot of doctors like keep it to themselves, don't talk about it, and then no one knows they're actually looking for anything. And then, those
yeah,
opportunities that come. And the other thing you
definitely.
mentioned is like this was the one job that you applied for, right? Um, and I think for a lot of doctors, particularly like they're quite scared about just like committing to one thing. Um, but again, that focus, as you just described, is important because you are able to invest your time in doing the right amount of prep around the company, the people, the approach, all of that stuff, when I'm sure that you were still busy with your clinical work, right?
Yeah,
So I mean, like I'd love to hear more about like, yeah, like is what I'm saying resonating with that experience, or is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm now in a place in my company where I'm involved in hiring processes. So I will
Mm,
interview new candidates, and we have hundreds of applicants for a small number of roles if you're just applying through um, the channels that are advertised on LinkedIn or through the
yeah.
website. But actually, what I'm seeing are a lot of people just reaching out to me on LinkedIn. Quite many are doctors saying, "Hey, I'd love to hear about your experience. I'd love to learn more about CF." And then they go on to apply for a role. So a referral doesn't have to be you need to know this person for the past however many years. It can just be, someone having reached out to me on LinkedIn and I've spoken to them. Essentially, it feels like a round one interview is enough to then for me to say to our HR team, like, actually, I think there's something there, and can we look at their application amongst the hundreds? So it doesn't have to be a big thing that a referral is. It's just making the effort, reaching out to someone on LinkedIn and see where that goes.
Right.
Um, and I think in the interview process, it really shows the people who've done their research versus those who have clearly prepped generic answers that would be applicable if they're applying to other companies, and it really shows through. So I think having that focus, whilst it's scary putting all your eggs in one basket, you can then pursue another opportunity whilst you've gone through the interview process, but dedicating time to really understanding that company comes through in the interviews.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's great to hear that, especially with the reach outs. Because I mean, I know a lot of doctors these days are reaching out on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And again, it's like, that is a way in, but also, as you said, just demonstrating that someone's actually there for the pull factors of the company and the opportunity rather than the push factors of I hate my job. This is why
Yeah.
I'm moving. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's really obvious when that happens, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Do you see a lot of that when you coming through the application process for people that you're, as a hiring manager yourself?
Yeah, I think people's passion for a company is really clear. So, especially those who refer to, thought leadership that we as a company have recently published and research that we've done, they've really gone out their way to read about why what we do aligns to sort of their passions and priorities.
Mm,
And that is just so important because, and I think you said that earlier, is good people bring good people. And I think that was a huge mind shift for me going from public to private sector is the skills that you have in your people. That's essentially your only asset that you really need to keep in the private sector because all the knowledge and skills you've gained in this company, if you don't keep your people, they'll take it away with them to another
yeah,
company and give value to another company. So how
yeah.
much they emphasize and value their people was something that I don't think I really experienced as much in the public sector.
Yeah, no, that's important, and the value in the people and the recognition of skill sets beyond just knowledge and qualifications in that sense, because it is about the application, the relationships, the soft skills that I see,
Yeah.
particularly in the industry, has way more currency than perhaps it does in the public sector. So no, that's great. And so, I mean, you've already mentioned one of those mindset shifts. Are there any others that really stands out that you had to make in order to move and to grow?
Yeah, there's definitely a few that come to mind.
Hmm.
So maybe this is the way I approached it, but going through school, A levels, university, then postgraduate training, you feel like, you just have to prove yourself at each point and just get onto the next step on this treadmill. And you can often feel like you're not good at anything else apart from medicine.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
we actually forget that being a doctor has so many of the soft skills that private sector look for. So problem solving, we do that every single day when we meet a patient, understand what's happened and try to make a diagnosis. And problem solving is such a big, important skill that private sector look for, especially in consulting. Um, Breaking down complicated information, communicating it in a way that someone else can understand, that avoids, professional jargon. There are so many skills that I didn't realize I had as a doctor that is translatable and transferable to other industries. So really unpicking what are those skills, and then you can really sell yourself much better in an interview process to say, actually, I'm not just a doctor. I can do X, Y, and Z, and these are the reasons why I'm good at it. And kind of shifting that into how do you sell yourself? That was
Yeah.
difficult.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you've mentioned those points in particular. I mean, the last one, how to sell yourself, that's our first major masterclass in our fellowship. How to
Yeah.
sell yourself, right? And I'm really interested to find out more about, those soft skills that you can unpick. Because I mean, what we've seen, particularly in the last 10 years of me working in the sector of doctors and alternative careers, is that there has been a shift from a industry employer perspective of like, we just need a doctor to actually, we need a doctor who has commercial mindset, whatever it is, but also that the other kind of outward facing things like is able to stand out and speak, social media following, like content creating, all of that, all of those kind of online digital skills, as well as the softer client customer facing skills, that means anything. But I guess the question I have is, and again we also face this challenge, is that because there's so many doctors going for the same thing in industry, they'll all come up with the same thing, which is I have problem solving skills. I am good with patients. I
Yeah.
am good at working in a team. So all of the usual stuff. And one of the things I'm like is like, listen, everyone's saying that. So how are you going to differentiate yourself from the next doctor who has exactly the same skills? So what would you say about that? Like, how do you differentiate between all these doctors who pretty much have the same thing?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And maybe when I made the transition, there were fewer doctors, and
Mm,
I I definitely appreciate it's much harder now because there are a lot more considering alternative careers, so the competition is fierce.
mm-hmm,
Um, what I find gaps are with experienced hires when I interview them is yes, they bring all these additional skills, but then I bring it back to okay, if you were doing this job for me tomorrow, I'm the manager, you're my consultant. Um, can you actually do the day job? So, and I mean that by, are you only good at making a PowerPoint? Are you good at synthesizing information? Can you handle a complex Excel analysis? And how can you demonstrate you've had those skills? So, I try to tease information out of people like, okay, have you done big audits where you've had to manipulate large data sets? Because that then gives people the confidence to say, okay, I know you've got all these extra things, but you've also got the basics and the fundamentals. So I know you're not going to struggle when you hit the ground running.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
so
a
it's
lot
just
of
that's yeah, go on.
Yeah, and I think a lot of doctors they bring out the operational and the shop floor experience, but sometimes lack some of that backing to basic
Mm,
skills. So maybe working out
mm,
what examples can you demonstrate just to give the interviewer the
mm,
confidence that you can do the bare minimum.
So it's really picking out those, yeah, the experience, because again, a lot of doctors say, oh, I don't have an experience. Will I be able to get a job? And the ones that, there's a difference. There's ones that say, I don't have experience, so I'm not even going to bother. And there's others that I don't have any like direct experience, but I've got transferable experience that I know that they're going to value. And
Yeah,
again, it's a mindset thing, isn't it? Because pretty much anyone
completely.
I find can walk into an interview, and it really is how to sell yourself, picking out things in your life, and everyone has something, whether it's medicine or not medicine. Again, this is another thing I was going to ask you, because a lot of doctors discount what they've done outside of medicine as something of value that they can also use in these kind of interviews because they might not have been paid for it, or it's not directly their profession. And I like, and actually one of the things that we really focus on in the fellowship is like, okay, pretend you're not like you haven't ever done medicine. What else have you done? And
Yeah,
then yeah, have you ever got married, for example? You've been an event planner. What did that actually include? I'm sure it included manipulating data sets, you know, on
yeah,
spreadsheets, and
yeah,
like organizing teams of people, particularly your family members, like designing things, being able
yeah,
to come into an
absolutely.
interview and say, hey, I did this and I managed it and I had a budget of X. And, you know, it kind of demonstrates actually you can identify the skills that you actually have and then communicate them and then make sure they're relevant to what they're looking for. And that's
Yeah,
creativity on that own. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
yeah, I love the idea that you can do anything from your daily life. Have you planned a wedding? Have you bought a house? those are skills that you've had to apply as well, and probably,
Absolutely.
different skills from your day job, but actually still
Yeah.
really important. And lots of doctors, they don't want to come in as an analyst sort of at the grad level, which I completely appreciate because they bring added value and there's that salary differential as well and the expectations. So what are you going to do to show me you don't need to be an analyst? Okay, can you
Mm-hmm.
do the very basic things that we would take the analyst training through? They have a year to 18 months to learn this. So can you show me you've got some of that basics so then it's quicker for me to train you? So,
Mm-hmm.
okay, have you managed your wedding budget finance? So you've delivered it to the budget that you anticipated? Or actually, if you've had a problem, how did you resolve it and what have you learned about yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. That self-reflection piece,
Yeah,
that growth mindset
yeah,
piece. Yeah, I mean, there's so much I could talk about here, but yeah, okay, so going back to the mindset shifts, we've talked about a lot here, and it's such great stuff and points to illustrate so far. And yeah, the final point is, like we've touched upon it again, growth mindset. Is that important in a job like this? What is it? What does that look like to you?
yeah. It's super important. And that mindset shift was unexpected in the way that
Mm,
it's the way that I received that because my experience in medicine was always, you have your educational supervisor, you've got a clinical supervisor, you get your meetings in with them. It's quite painful. It's a tick box exercise. No one really cares as long as you pass your ARCP. It's you don't become outstanding, you just pass, and that's okay. And actually, it just means what you're aiming for is mediocre.
mediocre tick box.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
actually the opposite of what a lot of doctors are because we're all, high achievers. We strive for
Yes.
more, so we do these extra things that don't get the recognition. Whereas in the
Mm,
private sector, it does. So I had my first one-to-one with my not line manager, but we call it development sponsor. So you've got a line manager who manages your project, and then a development sponsor who manages your growth. And I had my first
mm,
meeting with them, and they said, "Oh, let me just put some time in with you." This was about 3 weeks in, and I thought, "Oh my God, I think I must be doing a really bad job. I think I'm going to get fired." Because I was so not used to someone proactively reaching out to me to say, "What can we do to help you grow?" And that's exactly what that conversation was, which is, okay, you're here now. How have you found the first few weeks settling in? How can we help you? What are your goals? What do you need? And I was just so not used to that. And my
mm,
mind immediately went to a bad place, which was, oh my God, I'm getting
mm.
fired.
And I would have thought exactly the same thing, especially, being in that public sector mindset culture. Someone reaches
Yeah,
out to you, you've done something wrong. You know?
exactly. Yeah.
Well, everyone wants a meeting, you've done something wrong. But
Yeah.
it's just you, yeah, absolutely. And I still feel like that it's been 8 years since I left the NHS entirely. And I still have that knee-jerk emotional response when anyone wants a meeting,
Yeah.
especially because I'm still a clinician. I still do occupational health work. I work for private contracts as a self-employed. So when everyone wants to have a chat, I'm still like, oh, what have I done?
Yeah. What have I
You
done
know,
wrong? Yeah.
exactly. And it is something that's just, yeah, just come out of being in a certain environment for so long, in this institutional way of thinking.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. And so let's step back into consulting in general and what the opportunities are in industry, in the consulting industry for doctors in general. So I mean, I was mentioning before we spoke, we see this time and time again. Doctors, they want to get into consulting because it's one of the three things to get into: health tech, pharma, or consulting, right?
Yeah.
Realistically, that's what they like, the vast majority, right? Because that's all they've heard about, and it's like, well, it must be the thing to do because everyone else is doing it. I'll get onto that another episode. But consulting, it is a really great industry. We talked about how it's really literally worth billions. I can't remember how much now, if not trillions. And particularly now with coaching and development growing, on a business level, on an individual level, the value of consulting is huge. But what we see time and time again is that doctors they have this really limiting belief that they can only really focus on three firms, which are the top firms in the world, the big three. For those of you that don't
Yeah.
know, I'm sure you are probably, you probably know McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, right? We know there's some other firms, but those are the main three, and they'll probably like not consider any other options. But one of the things that we know is there are thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands other consulting firms, which is actually easier to get into. It's like the difference between a tertiary referral and a DGH, in the sense of
Yeah.
DGH you get like to a district general hospital compared to a top firm, top hospital, like for those in the UK, got Great Ormond Street, UCLA, like the difference between those two types of hospitals, and in the smaller hospitals, that's where you'll get the experience. That's where they really value you because they need you to get like really hands on, and that's where you will really grow. Whereas in like the tertiary, it's like working in the NHS. You've got it's a very large organization. It's very structured, and actually, so are the salary bandings. But
Yeah.
yeah. I'd love to hear from you. Even though yes, it's great to once you're in there, you've got the badge. But what we know with these firms is because they're so well established and globally recognized, they can be super picky and they can basically tell you what they're going to offer you. And it may or may not be what you're after, but you'll just take it because of the brand more than what you're really looking for. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I've said a lot, but yeah, what stands out?
Yeah. I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head there. It is, you have to go back to what is it that you want to get out of consulting? Do you want a shiny badge of I've worked at McKinsey as a stepping stone, and actually surviving the year there is a great place for you to then move on to something else, knowing that you're probably not going to get the job satisfaction out of it versus somewhere else? Or do you actually want to invest in this consulting career, become a good consultant, really understand the industry, develop your skills, and really grow? In which case, I think boutique firms are far better for that because, when I joined my company, I had one-to-ones with all the partners, including the chief exec, because they just want to get to know
Great.
you as a person. And we still do that for all of our new hires, including the analysts. You would never dream of having that in some of the big firms because, their intakes can be hundreds a
Huge. Yeah.
year. It's huge. So you don't get that same personal touch. And it goes back to your individual goals. It's like, what is it that you want? And I knew from the get-go is I wanted to build out my skills. So I wanted an environment to help me grow and not just take any job that I can get into. It was very focused on what I wanted. And because of that, I've been able to get promoted twice within sort of 2 and a bit years, grow really quickly in an industry that I've never worked in before. Whereas I think in bigger firms, you are far more likely to get lost. Um, your colleagues become competitors rather than peers who you can learn and grow with. So at a smaller firm, you definitely have more of a camaraderie where you lean on each other's skill sets and grow with each other rather than say, oh, I don't want to tell this person about this opportunity because they're a competitor for this promotion. So there are really different ways of how the companies are run. And I think fundamentally, you have to work out what it is that's important to you. And one thing that's right for me isn't necessarily right for someone else. And that's okay.
No, I mean that's really great to hear. And as you said, that there are benefits to each, right? And it all comes down to what you really want and what's really important to you. And the problem is a lot of doctors just don't know that answer. That's what I see. That's actually most of our community from the research that we've done, that they like we're lost in the sense that we spent so much time in education, from
Yeah.
starting nursery school pretty much. And there hasn't been enough time in really understanding who we are, what's important to us, what our values are, and what we really want from life. Because your career is just part of that. It's not all of that. The problem is, as a doctor, essentially, your life is your career,
Yeah. You
right?
get a doctor label and
Yeah,
that's
and
sort of
that's it.
it.
That's you. Yeah, yeah. And so just really connecting with who you are as, using this as opportunity, especially if you're transitioning, is essential to avoiding any of the challenges that you've faced so far as a result of you wanting to move, if that makes any sense. So I see that a lot of doctors want to move because they're like, actually, we did a podcast, was it a few weeks ago with Rolake, who's now a she's a brand consultant, basically, right? Very creative. And she knew she didn't want to do medicine before she even applied for medicine. Right? There's a lot of doctors like that, right?
Yeah.
But still, because of like society, family, whatever, and it was a thing to do, she went and did it. But in that journey, she actually could have made very conscious decisions. Actually, this is just not for me, and actually went and moved on from it. And I can tell you, like, most of the doctors in our community are like, we've been waiting around and procrastinating for years. And actually, because you get so institutionalized into a way of thinking, you just don't feel you can move or do anything because of finances, mortgage, the world crumbling if you do something slightly different. And
Yeah.
so I think it does present as a barrier. But as I said, like, in this transition period, investing in understanding what you want is such a key part of this. So I'd love to ask, like, what did you do in that transition period to really ensure that this decision was right for you, the moving and this consulting firm? I'm not saying it kind of it started and it ended, because a lot of these, like, we always kind of reevaluate, don't we, as we grow. So I'd love to hear, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah. And I think to a degree, I still feel as part of that transition.
Mm,
So, right when I was considering leaving, I'm pretty sure HEE have career coaching as something that we can access. So, I sort of reached out and said, I really want to do this. And we did a lot of work on what you said was like core values. So, what
mm,
was important to me. And I had to do a lot of self reflection that I wasn't used to doing at all. And through that, I realized what was important to me in the next job and what was okay for me to give up. So before I thought it was really hard for me to give up being a surgeon, but actually it was the skills that I use in surgery rather than the actual doing surgery that I would miss the most. So actually the problem solving, the communicating, the sort of taking that through of getting to a solution was the bit that I loved the most. So recognizing that I can still have it in my new career was key to help me make sure that I made a good transition.
mm.
I think knowing you'll have blips and expecting blips is also part of it. So there were days in my new job where I thought, oh, I'm up really late and I'm working on a PowerPoint pack. Like, is this really the life where I was used to, save
Yeah,
lives?
yeah.
Um, and it brings it back to perspective. And sometimes you do wonder because it was such a risky move, a big, big shift. But actually, you bring it back to, okay, well, what were the core reasons and why I wanted to leave? And am I still going to be happy in 5, 10, 15 years' time? So recognizing that having blips is okay and doubts from time to time is okay, but that you're overall on the right trajectory for you was really important for me to make sure that that transition was right for me.
Great. I love that because, yeah, you described how, like, a lot of reflection, appreciating it's not all roses either. You're like, okay, now I'm in the dreamland and everything's great. That just never happens, right?
Yeah,
And you do have down days, you do like, what the hell? But I really love the fact that you identified, like, what is it within surgery that I really enjoy that I can also get in other areas and still like meet that need, and then also
yeah.
develop other things that you really enjoy in a different area, right? So I think that internal reflection is such an important part of it. And I'd love to hear, so there's the last point. So we've talked about briefly, we talked about the difference, like, with like big three consulting, boutique consulting. And then, like, the third type of consulting, which again, which actually is a very much, you can walk into this, pretty much anyone can, which is where you consult for yourself. So, like, we call it non-clinical consulting, um, as a doctor. So that can take so many different shapes, sizes, forms, industries, etc., etc. But again, I see a lot of resistance from doctors because it's like, oh, I don't know, A, like, what people would want, B, how to position myself, C, like, wouldn't know where to start, type thing. And again, the whole idea of like working for yourself and not having an employed job is really scary financially for a lot of doctors. So, I mean, what would you say about having like consulting as an option? Because one of the great things about consulting is that you don't necessarily have to leave your job to do it. Right? It's
Yeah.
like dipping your toe into the water, getting into a sector without having to wait for a job and cherry picking the work that you want to do and the work you don't want to do. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about that as being an avenue to get into consulting as a practice.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting space because more and more doctors are considering portfolio careers. So, what expertise do they bring that someone else might not have, and how can they, leverage that? And I think part of that is really understanding, well, what is your expertise? What is your niche? And everyone has something. So, working down to the core is what is it? What's your offer? And I think the idea of going out to being, trying to pursue work can be quite scary. So there are some routes that you can consider, such as working with firms as an associate. So doing short-term pieces of consulting work for a few weeks, for example, rather than signing up to them with a full-time contract. It's a good opportunity to bring in your expertise because they'll say, actually, yeah, we've got this project in X, Y, and Z, and we don't have any in-house experience, but this person reached out to me a few months ago who could be really interesting. Let's bring them in as an associate. And then that will give you the exposure to that company, exposure to consulting. You can be an associate for lots of different companies to get a flavor of what is it that you like, what don't you like, before you make that, big leap. And a lot of that comes from reaching out to people on LinkedIn to make those connections and just making them aware, hey, I'd love to do some ad hoc things. Would love it if you could consider me going forwards. Let's stay in touch. And the following up every few months to say, yeah, how are things, what's new, and sort of starting to build your own personal brand in the space that's just outside of clinical medicine.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. And there are so many different opportunities within firms, but also to work for yourself and actually finding those opportunities yourself, right? And I know it opens up a big Pandora's box for a lot of people. And this is why in the Doctors in Industry Fellowship, we support doctors in doing just that. And it doesn't need to be in a typical consulting industry. It could be anything. So health tech, for example, is an area that is ripe for doctors consulting on their own terms, part-time, side time, sometime, full-time, And again, it's like, I am very passionate, my team are very passionate about ensuring that doctors know how to position themselves as experts because we've talked about value a lot in this podcast. And one of the things that doctors really struggle with is understanding their value, pricing their value, because money is not something we talk about in general as doctors. And so like what advice would you give, closing, what advice would you give to doctors who really want to understand like how valuable are they in industry, without getting an MBA, without like as they are, like what does that look like and how do they best articulate that? Because you also mentioned personal branding. Like what is industry looking for? How does someone communicate their value? And what would you say to that? So
Yeah,
big question again,
it's a
but
really, yeah,
what's
really
that?
big
What
question.
just immediately comes to mind?
Yeah, and it's something I'm working on, building my personal brand. But
Mm,
what comes to mind really is, what are you passionate about? So as doctors, we all have to do extracurricular things, audits, research, studies, conferences, presentations. You do that in your own time, so surely you must be passionate about it. So go away and have a think about what is it that you're passionate about, because you've done the extra research, so you are ahead of your colleagues in that, having more knowledge about something. So then surface that, make that known that, in this particular field of medicine, surgery, anesthetics, whatever it may be, I've done an extra study on this or on that. And actually just voicing it makes people realize that this is your niche, and then you can start to build your own brand around that. I think it's really important because we tend to shy away from our achievements as doctors, because we think, oh, everyone's doing something, but we should really celebrate our own successes.
I totally agree. It's about celebrate recognizing the successes, number one,
Yeah,
recognizing them, acknowledging them, and then celebrating them. But not through just the achievements in that sense. It's like the actual personal growth successes. A success could be you went and applied for a job, right? Or you had a conversation with someone in industry that you were really interested in, right? That and it's those small steps repeatedly over time that get you to where you want to go, not the big leaps that people tend to only you know, celebrate once you like say got your CCT and it's like, right, finally made it 10 years. What did that
Yeah.
all fucking mean, you know? So like, you know, but yeah, but anyway, thank you so much, Lisi, for coming on to this podcast, sharing your expertise, sharing your like really being compassionate about what doctors are going on and like really connecting with that whole doctor piece in that journey and sharing your own journey, and especially as a hiring manager, because I'm sure a lot of doctors will be reaching out to you now. Going, hey, you said I should reach out. But if anyone does want to reach out, how do they best do that?
I'm on LinkedIn as my name is, so feel free to send me a message. Always really happy to speak to everyone. You know, I know it's a really daunting time thinking about making that transition, so really happy to share my experience and maybe offer some advice.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lisi. And remember, anyone, if you are looking to really sustainably grow yourself, move to industry faster and guarantee that move, then go to the Doctors in Industry Fellowship at, well, now we've got an actual domain, which is doctors in industry, drsindustry.com/DIIO, or you can go to medicfootprints.org // industry, and it will get you there too. Anyway, thank you so much, Lucy, and I hope to speak soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
Bye.